Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Hope Report, your light in the darkness, brought to you by the Lindell Recovery Network. I am Jason Perry.
And I'm Melissa Huray. We made it to Thursday this week. I'm still getting used to the 5 days a week. It's been
Yeah.
great, but it's hard to keep track of what day it is. But yeah, tomorrow's Friday, so we've
Or do
almost
I
made
need,
it.
or do I need this Friday?
Me
I need this
too.
Friday bad. So I'm
Yeah.
I'm glad I'm glad the weekend's coming, but I am excited for today. I know your testimony is going to knock them dead. I know God's going to do some amazing things with it. I know that you've really composed your thoughts. You've got a book coming out about it, and I'm sure you're going to put my amateurs bumbling
No.
to shame,
How'd you
and that
know I
you're going to.
composed my thoughts? How did you know I did anything?
Yeah, sure. I'm sure you haven't slept at all last night, and
No,
you've got
that's
about
not true.
32 pages of notes.
No, I have a few just because I want to emphasize more about what Jesus did after the sobriety. I think that's
Yeah,
a big part of the testimony. What happened after I was delivered of the addiction, because there was a lot more testimony that happened, and there still is. There still probably is that last remaining thing that I need to get free of. But before we get to that, Jason, I saw a super absolutely darling video of your little girl playing hide and seek with you. That was
yeah,
too sweet. I showed it to my girls too. Her little voice
yeah.
counting down. So did you have a good
Counting to
game of hide and
10.
seek?
Yeah, we play 4 games. We play hide and seek. We play tag, and this is all running around the house. So I got to use all my football juke
Yeah.
moves, and and then we play the sleep game, which is where I pretend to sleep. She comes in, creeps in, climbs on my back, and then jumps up and down on my back to wake me up. Right? That's that. And then I tickle her, and then the tickle game, which is where we take turns tickling, and
Oh,
and so it's really funny, and it's like tag with tickling, that one.
yeah.
But it was a blast. It was a part, again, I don't want to say it was a part of anything, but this is something that we're doing in the Page Crusader mission
Yeah.
90-day Crucible Challenge, and it's deliberate pursuit of family. And yesterday was a really good one. I planned on doing Lauren yesterday,
Oh,
right?
you did.
Right. So I planned day one, I planned on doing it, and I wrote it before I did it. And then the opportunities came up for B, so I just shifted fire and went to
Oh,
B.
okay.
So my intent today was to go after B, or after Lauren. And today Anya had like a negative or a DEFCON 5 full scale meltdown, temper
Oh,
tantrum thing. So I really had to step into the role that I've been neglecting. So my wife is so amazing. She wants my time with the girls to always be pleasant because I work and this and that. So she
yeah.
takes on the role of disciplinarian a lot of the time. Like with B, that was never right. So I would be
Yeah.
involved in that because
The golden child.
yeah, she was the golden child. But with Anya, Anya's been so challenging for both of us, and she has just been jumping on that grenade of discipline.
Mm.
And today, I was getting ready to go out to the gym, staying on track, right? And Anya's in a DEFCON 5 meltdown, and I had to not go to the gym and spend an hour working through this violent temper tantrum at 13 months.
Oh
Like
boy.
it was
Wow.
draining. Like when I get
Yeah.
on this show and I feel like I just ran a marathon or I was in a
Oh,
10 round fight.
yeah.
And Lauren had tears in her eyes. We're trying to
Oh.
work through it with her, and there's so much contradictory information out there, right?
Mhm.
Counseling and all that stuff has gone, so far. But if you look at how kids behave, the kids of the last 30 years suck the worst,
Right.
and the previous 100 years and before, where stoic discipline is the one stuff that worked, right?
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
so trying to figure out what you can expect. I mean, Anya is a brilliant 13-month-old. I mean,
Yeah.
she is brilliant. She understands things, this and that, and what to expect from her and how to work through her controlling her emotions has been extremely challenging for us. That for us. And I had to go apologize to my wife and say, I have failed you. I have let you ride this for too long, and I need to step in. And but one thing that you have to do when you're doing that, right, is if you're both in the room in that fire, right, in the firefight or whatever you want to call it, in the fire of dealing with this kid and all that, you're still both being traumatized by it. And watching someone else discipline your kid, even if it's your husband or wife, still takes a toll on you. So
Yeah.
if you trust them and they're not out of control, like they're not get, sometimes kids push your buttons just like everything else. And sometimes you need to tag out, right?
Hmm.
Some come in and tag you out. And, you need to remove yourself and let that person do what they're going to do. And then,
Yeah.
when it's time, if you hear things in the other room, maybe getting out of control or someone getting frustrated, you come in and say, I got this for a bit and you need to remove yourself just to get back down to green, because when you're in that fire, you're in the red zone, your kid's screaming, it's terrible. You're trying to help them cope with stuff and it's just awful.
Yeah.
So we're trying to navigate that. And so today, my deliberate pursuit, which is the second pillar of our 4 pillars, is working on Anya and getting the appropriate relationship with her and trying to come up with a discipline plan for her to help her deal with transitions that can be extremely challenging, um, and do that. So
Yeah, that
the other,
says a lot about you that you shifted gears there or from your plan. It would have been a lot more fun to just, love Lauren and make her day wonderful and focus on her instead of shifting to the more difficult person to love in that moment.
yeah, and it's and again, it's the right thing to do. So I had to do it, and and again, it's so draining. I'd rather
Yeah.
be in a heavyweight boxing match with Mike Tyson than do that.
Yeah, Mike and I went through a brief time with that with our older daughter. Well, when I say older, I mean Mike and I have 2 kids together, and then I have
Right.
another child from my other marriage, which we'll hear about today. But our 2 girls together, almost the same apart as you guys, about 2 years and 4 months. And Macy went through this thing where she would not get into her car seat. She would stiffen up like a board. She would make her body super rigid and scream and scream and scream. And so we had to, instead of one parent picking up one kid and vice versa, we would have to both go and, go and put her in the car manually. I just remember that, like how hard that was, and I don't know what it was from, but we had to do it together. It was the only way to do it.
Yeah, it's just one of those things, and they're in this irrational phase, and
Yeah.
you're, and you just and again, I would love to find some real data, some real Christian counseling on this, on what's appropriate,
Yeah.
instead of coddling and making horrible children, which seems to be like what is going through the schools, and everything else is just rewarding bad behavior,
Yeah.
enabling bad behavior. And I want to do the right thing for my kid. I love my kid. I don't want to
Of
unnecessarily
course.
discipline my kid. I want to do what the most appropriate thing is, the most positive outcome for them, right? It's not about
Yeah.
my ego. It's not about my power. It's not about any of that, right? So, but who is that trusted resource? I don't know him.
Yeah.
And just like diet, you want contradicting information, go look at How to Raise Kids. Find
Yeah.
that book. Find that book and tell me which one of those doesn't contradict one another.
Well, we know it's not gentle parenting. My daughter Macy told me about gentle parenting. I'm sure
I've never
she
heard of
laughs
that.
about it. I don't know exactly all the details of it, but it's certainly not what you would subscribe to, Jason. It's about just, loving them through all of their emotions and never disciplining. That's what I'm imagining. If someone out there knows what gentle parenting is, please weigh in. But yeah, you have
I'm
to
sure
find
every kid on the
something.
planet is going to push for that.
Give me the
Yeah.
gentle. But
Yeah.
seriously, I think they wanna be disciplined. I remember being young and saying to my parents, "Will you just tell me to pick up my toys?" Like, I was craving structure, and I just wanted to have some rules enforced because there were so few rules,
Yeah.
when I
And
was, small.
that's part of your testimony and part of mine. You just want someone to fight you. I knew if I could irritate my mom enough, she would just surrender and let me go do whatever I wanted.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I know what you mean. My mom was the same way. If I could wear her down and I knew I could, then she'd be at the mall buying me a Guns N' Roses t-shirt by noon. I mean, even though I
Yeah.
stayed out all night and I got drunk and didn't come home, I could weasel my way back. And that's the worst thing. Actually, my daughter is grounded right now. I didn't tell you that story, but last night she tried to weasel me a little bit and say, "Hey, do you think maybe I could do this sleepover on February 17th or something like that?" And I was like, "No, no." I mean, the rule was 2 months. I mean, it
Right.
wasn't, I can tell you what it was. It wasn't super outrageous, but it's like you're getting your phone taken away for 2 months, and
Yep.
that's what we're doing. So anyway, yeah, they will do everything. They will try to push you to break your boundaries down. And if you do, then you might as well forget it, because you have no authority then if you can't
Yeah,
keep your boundary.
and it's going to scar that kid later down the road, right?
Yeah.
Because you didn't care enough to be miserable for them. They're making you miserable and they're watching it and they're like, oh, if I just make them uncomfortable, they don't
Yeah.
love me enough to do what's best for me. Because the kid knows what's best for them in the end, right?
Yes.
And it's like, why did you let me do this? Like, why did you let me do all this stuff? Like, are you kidding me? I would never let, like, I'm a parent now. I would never let somebody do that, you know?
Yeah.
And it's,
No.
and, you know, and again, it's because of their brokenness and where they came from and all that
Right.
stuff. But,
Yeah.
you know, all these topics are going to be really, really relevant here in a few minutes when we get to your testimony. If I could just push the
Yes.
challenge
Please
that
do.
we're doing. So
I
we're
did my
on day.
stuff today. I just didn't enter it yet. Okay.
That's all right. Yeah, that's fine. You got all the way to the end of the day to enter it, right?
Yes.
I mean, you can either enter what you're going to do, or better yet, at the end of the
At the
day,
end, after you
right?
completed it.
After you completed it, because what I've put in, I've had to go and change as things just evolved, right?
Right.
So
Right.
again, the whole point is there was nothing there, so I had to provide a model. So it was what I was gonna do because it was posted the night before.
Yeah. Right. I
Right.
get
So
it.
you see what I'm saying? So
Yeah.
once everyone gets in there, so it's a 90-day challenge, right? All the science out there says, the most recent studies that it takes 90 days to build a habit, that to take it on. So it's about deliberate, not accidentally doing anything in your life, particularly the most important things, which are what? Your faith, your family, your fitness, and your health. And then Lauren renamed tactics fundamentals last night
Oh,
because
that's
it was great.
great.
So, and it's
Oh, I
just
love
life
it, Lauren.
fundamentals, right? So yeah, because I
An
needed
F
an F.
word. An F word.
Yeah, we needed an F word. And then if I had to add a fifth, it'd be finances, but that'll be
Yeah.
another day, right? But anyways, so it's deliberately pursuing your relationship with your Heavenly Father, deliberately pursuing a better relationship with your friends and family around you, and then becoming a better vessel, deliberately pursuing becoming a better vessel for the Holy Spirit. So getting your health right, right,
Yes.
and getting your fitness right. And then the fundamentals part is my tactical / prepper side / making sure you can take care of your family, because you're the shepherd of your family, right? And most people who watch us are in charge of their family. And so, helping people do that with whether it be self-defense stuff, prepping stuff, homesteading stuff, common sense stuff.
Yeah. No, I think it's fantastic. It's definitely made me more intentional. I've been talking about changing up my workouts, doing some additional things. So I'm thinking
I
about,
saw some dancing this morning.
well, that was just firing myself up to do something. But I want to get back more into weights and core and abs and some of the other, which all help with running, not overrunning, but being more comprehensive. And then my diet yesterday was really good with the whole foods, and I felt much better than grabbing the gluten-free snacks just to get by, but making two real meals. So I had two good meals, and I focused on my daughter Haley. She didn't respond to me, but hey, I made the effort. It
You
usually
made the
takes her
effort.
2 days
Yep.
to respond to my text, but so Claudette, thank you for your comment. I can share you later what's going on. It's nothing serious, but it's all about, she's almost 15 and she's been pushing her limits a little bit more lately. And actually I want to say about our youth pastor, I shared it with her, and we never want to relegate our responsibility as parents to youth pastors, but Macy is very close with this youth pastor she's the pastor's wife, actually the youth pastor's wife. She's in her early 20s. She got married young to a youth pastor. Very, very wonderful girl. She's the head of the worship team, and I sing on the worship team. But she came over and picked Macy up the other day. They went and spent some time together and talked, and she shared with her about, different aspects of her life she struggled with as a young person. So that meant a lot to me. That spoke volumes to me. So I was really grateful for that.
Well, that's great. That's absolutely fantastic. But let's get into you now.
Okay.
I'm excited to hear this. It's been a while, and I know you've done a lot of reflection and how you want to say this, and I can't wait to get into your testimony. So, who is the redeemed Melissa Huray?
Well, thank you, Jason. We're going to do it just like we do the Hope Report. Well, I'm still a work in progress. I am a child of God. I'm a defender of the Trinity, as my title suggests. I've become very passionate about the defense of the Trinity and the deity of Jesus, and being able to articulate that and become biblically literate. I mean, increase my Bible knowledge. This has been a hunger for the past few years. And I'm trying my best to lead my girls to be godly women. I'm still in charge of 2 of them. The other one is a 28-year-old adult. So we're trying to redefine our relationship as parent and adult, adult child. And I live with my husband, Mike. We've been together almost 20 years. We will be
Praise the
married.
Lord.
Thank you. We'll be married 19 years in September. And yeah, I love the Lord, and I just want to help people through this testimony. I really, like you said, I went back and thought about it. I try to be purposeful. I don't just want to regurgitate a bunch of stuff from, all the drinking years. And that stuff's so long ago. I mean, I've been sober for almost 20 years, but I still had so much work to do after I got sober. I was quite unhealed at the time I was delivered of addiction, and I still struggled with a lot of character defects and trauma and from the past. So God's been working on that for a good length of time.
All right. Well, let's go to chapter 1.
All right, chapter 1. I'm just going to start off. I wanted to share some things about my family of origin. I think most of the time when I talk about them, it's not very favorable what I share, and I feel a little bad about that. I have learned to forgive my parents and to, like my nose is running because I don't know why. I think because I'm drinking a hot beverage, but my parents were good people. They tried their best with us, and my mom and dad got married my mom got pregnant with my brother when she was 16, and she was very sheltered. She lived in northern Minnesota and had really stoic parents who were strict. She met my dad and she got pregnant. My dad was kind of this surfer boy who was a musician, and he went to Florida in the winters, something that was unheard of here in Minnesota. You never heard of people doing that. But he and his family would go stay in West Palm Beach for the winters. And it wasn't that they were rich, but my grandma had this fantasy of doing it. And they had a small trailer they took out there. So my dad would do his schoolwork, or they'd send his schoolwork, and he would do it. So my mom met him. She got all swept away with him. And she was pregnant by the time she was 16. And my mom, I think about it makes me sad. She got married 2 weeks before my brother was born. And it was really undercover. She wore a brown maternity dress, and she never had any pictures. There was never one picture of their wedding. And that makes me really sad to think about it now, that, that's not how she thought her life would go. She wanted to go to college. She actually had a really solid, intact family. My grandpa was in World War II. He was a very straight-laced guy and a good dad and a disciplinarian. And he raised my mom right, I think. I've never said this before. This is just coming out this way. I mean, I think he raised my mom right. And then she kind of got caught up with my dad, who had a fast car. And my dad was very coddled by his mother. He was sort of a party boy who never had to grow up. Yep. Although he did, he had some acclaim he was on the swimming team. And he was an all-around American guy. But then when his dad died, he started drinking. So my parents had gotten married when they were 17 and had my brother, and then they moved in with my grandma, which became the cabin house that I grew up in. So my grandma I mean, it's weird. It's weird how this generational thing, how it started out. And speaking of generational curses, I wanted to mention that, but I think that was one of the things upon my family was the alcoholism. You talked about that in your family too, how it goes back and it's so deep. With my dad's mother and all of her brothers and his dad's brothers and all this heavy alcoholism. There was suicide. My grandma's sister committed suicide, and my cousin committed suicide. And then there was a lot of depression. There was just so I believe in spiritual influences like that. And I think, like we've talked about, you need to be the one to break the cycle. So there was this long history of alcoholism, and my dad started drinking when his dad died. And actually the doctor came to him and said, Dan, you can start drinking blackberry brandy. It will help your stomach because you're really stressed out, and it will soothe your stomach. I guess that's what they said in the
doctors
60s.
Providing great advice, even back then. I guess they've always sucked.
That could be a lie. Maybe my dad made that up. It's possible. It was always a tale that I heard.
Nothing like drinking a 1/4 of vodka before you go to
For
bed
first
to
thing in
help
the
with your
morning.
stomach. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So my mom started getting a little concerned because dad was nipping on the brandy all day, but he's like, well, the doctor told me to do it. So she was 17. She had this infant son. She's living with my grandma and my dad. So that's just kind
Any
of,
faith?
well, my mom's parents were strict Lutherans. They were very, they're Scandinavians. My great grandparents came from Norway. They were all Lutherans. They were in the Lutheran church. So they do the
Yeah.
potlucks and the old school, So my mom did go to church when she was young, but I never got any sense that it was a super important part of their life. I think it was more of the Christmas and Easter and special occasions, and she went through confirmation. But I did find some old books of hers. She had some Bible books and she had made some notes, like she was trying to learn things about the Bible at some point in her 20s. So I thought that was kind of interesting. But my dad always loved the Lord. He always talked about the Lord. I don't know if he was spirit filled. His brother was a minister who traveled around the upper Midwest to different churches. But so I didn't come along till my brother was 6. And my parents had been married for 6 years. And then they somehow stayed together. Grandma moved out and she rented them the cabin that they had turned into a year-round home. And then I was born. And I was just going to say about my early childhood is that you were talking about disciplining and stuff. And I know that I got spankings, but I don't remember them. I was only told about them later, where my mom said I would get so terrified of my dad that I would wet my pants, that he would take his belt and whip it off really hard. And I would hear that belt and then I would just pee my pants, which is like, when I think about that, it makes me so sad for myself. It makes
Yeah.
I just think it's horrible. And I know we've talked about how you have to explain what's happening, and there's a procedure to it. If you're going to spank a kid, it's not putting the fear of God into them so they're terrified of you. And I probably only got a handful of spankings and I don't really remember them, but I know that something in my early childhood made me terrified of authority, and especially men and men with beards. This is really weird. My mom said when I was young, I would I would lose it and have a meltdown if a man with a beard tried to come near me or pick me up. So
Wow.
something with that. And then another early trauma was being left alone in cars. My dad would do this. Sometimes if we were just going to the store together, or maybe he wanted to run into the bar and have a couple quick drinks, he would leave me in the backseat of the car. And it would be like the door would be right there. But I was like, I would have a full down meltdown panic. I was afraid I was going to be kidnapped. So when I talk about my trauma, it's a lot different than someone who was sexually abused or was, being beaten by their parents. It's not that kind of trauma, but it made me have all these phobias around being alone, people leaving me, abandonment. And we talk about the abandonment wound, and being left and, being, I guess, fear-based, very shame and fear-based, where I was terrified of lying. And I was about 5 or 7 years old, and my mom told me she loved me, and I couldn't answer because I wasn't sure if I loved her. And I said to her, I can't answer you because I don't know if I love you. I think I do. I might love you, but I don't want to lie. I'm afraid that I might lie. And she was just devastated. She cried. And after a couple weeks, I decided I did love her. But so that's just some things about what led into this anxiety that I had and this terrible fear of people leaving me. But I had, as far as church goes, we went to a Presbyterian church. It was in our community. We lived in northern Minnesota, so north of Duluth, but I don't know. I can't remember how far from the Canadian border, maybe 150 miles south of
How
it.
far from Fargo is what we need to know.
Well, here in the Twin Cities, I'm southwest of Fargo, but I'm like 300 miles from Fargo. But up north, I don't know. I was
10 miles.
It was probably what?
I'm just kidding.
No, you want to know about the Canadian border, don't you? Because that's
Yeah.
where we were up in the woods, though. We were in the North Woods, and like President Bush called it the Iron Ridge. It's actually
Sure.
the Iron Range, but we were not far from the Iron Range. But we went to church occasionally, more culturally. We would do the little ceremonies where I got a Bible, but I had this neighbor lady, and I've talked about her before. Her name was Marge, and Fargo. Marge was this beautiful Christian lady. Her and her husband didn't have any kids. he had a daughter from a previous relationship, but Marge couldn't have children. And my parents started having her babysit me actually at a very young age. And so a lot of the early seed planting happened from her. Even she told me things years later that my first steps, potty training, all that stuff was stuff with her, but I never knew that because I didn't remember it. And I stayed with her after school. She'd get me on and off the bus, and she taught me a lot about Jesus. She was spirit filled. My parents thought this was weird, but they didn't really say much about it because they didn't believe in born again Christians. It was like Jim and Tammy Faye stuff to them.
Yeah.
So they just tried to like keep that part of her away because they thought it was weird.
Yeah, I remember that as a kid. Don't go near the born agains.
Yeah.
We'll never see you again.
Yeah, the born agains. So yeah, they tread really lightly with them because they didn't want me to be exposed to something weird or something that would, like, I don't know. They could take only so much. But one summer she brought me to vacation Bible school at her church. She went to a Baptist church, and they did an altar call at the end of the week, and they asked who wanted to come ask Jesus into their heart. And I went along reluctantly because everyone else was doing it. I don't really think I understood what it was. They just said, if you want Jesus to come into your heart, come on down to the front. And many of us have this testimony. But the thing that was funny with me is that I felt so much shame after I did it. I felt like I did something wrong. I felt like I was going to be weird. And I went home that day and I sat on the counter in the kitchen and I was crying and I was saying to my mom, I asked Jesus into my heart, but I'm afraid you guys are going to be mad. And I'm afraid that, you're going to think I'm weird now. I thought I had somehow upset the family dynamic, that I was outside of the family now because I had done this. And my mom was trying to reassure me, but she was like, oh, it's nothing. I mean, don't worry about it. She basically told me it was no big deal and nothing to worry about. And, I don't know why you're getting so, it is just a prayer that you said. I mean, don't worry about it. Because to them, church was just, yeah, we believe in God. We know we do. We say the Lord's Prayer. We go to church sometimes.
It becomes a chore. It's not a relationship. It's a chore. Right?
Exactly.
It's like you got to make sure you check the box. You go to church. Right. There's nothing there. It's like going to the grocery store, someplace you got to go.
Yeah. Yeah. And my dad was an elder in the church, but he would go to church smelling like alcohol. He had been like up half the night drinking with the neighbors, and I'd be sitting next to him in church and I could smell him. I could smell like the alcohol coming out of his pores. Then him and my mom were fighting because, they could never get anywhere on time. And his drinking was starting to get worse. I also wrote down here that about years 0 to 9 were not that horrible, other than the early stuff I talked about with the belt and all that. But I started to have terrible anxiety around 4th grade because that was when I started being left alone. And I was, they would leave me alone after school. Like, first of all, I would just get off the bus and I'd be home alone. And my brother was a track star and a football star. My brother was a golden boy. He is good at everything. He didn't have any addictions. He was very respectful. He obeyed my parents and they let him do whatever he wanted. He really never did anything to get in trouble. So he did a lot after school. He was in a lot of sports. So anyway, he was never really around that much. But I'd be alone after school and I would be alone on especially Friday nights, and they would go out to the bars. And I have these memories of trying to find them. And I would go through the yellow pages and I'd call every bar and I would try to page my parents. And it would be, like 10 or 11 o'clock. It would be dark. It would be winter. I'd be alone in this house that had hardly any neighbors because there weren't a lot of year-round residents that were there. They would leave in the summer. So I had some people across the road, but they were like a half mile away. And I was terrified. I mean, I would fall asleep on the couch and have nightmares of somebody breaking in the house and wanting to murder me. And then my parents would come home and they'd be, half drunk, and they would just tell them, they'd bring me some fast food from the bar they were at. And I would be happy again because they were back.
Yeah. That was a lifestyle that a lot of people endured during those times, now today it'd be child endangerment, right?
Yeah.
With all the other different things out there. But, mom and dad going out and us key latch kids.
Yeah.
We were left alone with the TV.
Exactly.
It was a new babysitter.
I was so grateful for the TV. I had my whole lineup of stuff I would watch from the minute I got off the bus. And there's like after school specials I would watch, or I would watch the Jeffersons and Judge Wapner and Electric Company. I would watch all the shows. And during the week, they'd usually come home on time, but then they started going out more like Thursday nights, Friday nights. And I just started to panic, and so I ate a lot. I ate a lot of junk food and watched TV, and it just, soothed me and helped me get through it. And then shortly, my dad's drinking was escalating around here. My mom was around this time. My mom was financially supporting the family, really, which is a messed up dynamic. Dad was not bringing home the bacon. He had a lot of good careers. He was an insurance salesman. He was an auditor inspector, but he would not stick with things. He would get fired, or he would be, he didn't like the boss, or, he didn't want to, well, this is pretty much what killed him. He doesn't want to listen to anybody telling him to do anything. Even doctors saying you're going to die because your liver's failing. I don't got to do nothing. That was like a famous phrase he would say. So whenever someone would tick him off, a coworker, a boss, he would quit. And my mom I will say for my mom, she didn't make a lot of money, but she was a bookkeeper for a company. And she worked there from when I was in kindergarten till she retired. She had that job, and it really carried the family. And my dad had different odd jobs. He was a painter. He actually painted for my uncle. My uncle had a painting business, and my uncle would give him jobs to just kind of help my mom out. So when my dad would show up for work, it would be fine. But we always had some days I come home from school and the power was off. It's like, oh, the lights are off. Or I'd call my mom like, hey, the power's off. They would get their cars repossessed. They would usually have like junk vehicles, because my dad was a painter. So he'd get like these few $100 trucks and drive them around with his painting stuff. But we never really had anything, though they did try to get us, they tried. Like I wanted some skis for Christmas one year, and they got me some used skis, and I loved them. I thought I really was grateful for those skis. So we weren't poor to the point where we had no food or a roof over our heads or heat, but it was always where you're just right on the edge all the time.
Right.
So the hypervigilance, and that caused more anxiety. I couldn't really trust them to be stable and to provide for me. So I started, I kept gaining weight.
And
so
this is what age?
So I would say it goes from like about 10 to 14, where I was having a lot of anxiety, watching TV, eating a lot. I would kind of isolate from friends because I was starting to get bigger, and I didn't really want to. My neighbors would invite me out to play or play games, play softball. I didn't want to. I just want to stay inside and watch TV and eat and protect, kind of like stay in my little bubble. And I started to get teased at school because, back in the 80s, no one was really morbidly obese. And I wasn't either, but I was about, probably 30 pounds overweight. And so I started to get teased, and people making fun of me, saying, you're so fat, you can only wear elastic waist pants because nothing else will fit you. And, like all the time in gym, being the last picked for gym, all that kind of stuff. And I, started to really hate my body and hate myself. But then I would just eat to cope with that. This went on till 14. And you may have heard this story before, but I had this turning point. I went to visit my old pediatrician. I had to get a tetanus shot, and he weighed me, and I'm going to tell you what I weighed because I remember it very well. So I'm 5'3", and I weighed 165, and I was in 8th grade, and I was pretty overweight for a person who's 5'3". And he told me, he looked at my chart, and he said, if you keep gaining weight, no boys are ever going to take you out. Like he said it in like an old man fumbling way, like, Melissa, you're getting really heavy. If you don't lose some weight, no boys are ever going to take you out like on snowmobile rides and stuff like that. Isn't that a Minnesotan thing to say? You're not going to get invited on any snowmobile rides.
You're not going to be invited to the ice fishing
competition. I know. And I was so humiliated and ashamed and embarrassed. I was like, because I guess I thought people didn't notice my weight because I would wear, the style of the day was the stirrup pants and like really baggy sweatshirts that go down to your knees. And then you wear some chunky beads or some colorful beads. So I felt like my clothes hid my weight. I just didn't really think people were noticing, although my classmates, called me fat and stuff. But to have a doctor tell me that, I was really mortified. So all of a sudden, this switch flipped in my mind. And this reminds me of when you were talking about how you decided to become a Navy SEAL. You're like, okay, explain to me the parallels here. No, where you have this grim determination, and all of a sudden you decide, I'm going to do this, and I'm going to prove everybody, I'm going to prove it to everyone that I, I'm not this, what they say I am. I'm going to become something else, and they're not going to believe it. And so my whole determination was, I'm going to lose weight, and I'm going to prove to people, people are going to love me, basically, was what was attached to this. So I went on this crash diet, and somewhere in my mind, I decided I was going to eat 290 calories a day. That was the figure I came up with. And my mom kind of
Holy
applauded.
smokes.
290,
290.
290. Yeah. And I would make it for like 8 days on that. And then I would have a binge, and I would eat like a whole box of Little Debbie's. And then I would be like, oh, I'm so mad at myself. I'm so
Right.
disgusting. And then I would start over again and do it again. And my mom was really proud of me. I mean, she knew that I was upset about my weight, and she's like, oh, you're doing so well. But after a while, she started to think I was going a little too far. But I lost about 40 pounds. And we talked yesterday with Stephanie about how quickly things pivot, because I had been really sheltered from sex. I grew up in the woods. I had a few close friends in my neighborhood, but I never messed around with boys. I didn't know a lot of like sexual terminology that kids my age knew. I didn't even know what it was. I just pretended I knew. Like someone would mention like BJ. Don't know if we can say that on the show. And I would be like, what is that? But I just laugh like I didn't know what it was. Or different sexual positions. I had no clue. My mom never talked to me about sex. Nobody talked about sex. Not at all. Not even like, hey, she was a teen mom. I mean, we should have had this conversation. But so I'm 14, I lost a lot of weight, and I started going to the dances at school, and it was like the end of 8th grade and then into 9th grade. I was still pretty wholesome, but people were starting to compliment me on my weight loss, and people were starting to say, wow, wow, you look good. You've lost weight. And I really, found it very validating, and I wanted more of it. And one day, well, it was toward the end of 9th grade. I was riding the bus home with my friend who had known my whole life. And I kept looking in the back, and I saw this guy sitting in the back of the bus. I'm going to date myself and tell you what he was wearing, like this satin jacket. And he had
a members only jacket.
No, it was like, I think it might have even been a Budweiser jacket, like a satin jacket. Just picture it. And he had on a baseball hat, like a Ford baseball hat. He had a mullet, and it kind of like curled out from the sides, blonde mullet. And he had kind of a scruffy, sandy mustache. And he had a dip of Copenhagen in his lip. And I was like,
just what every dad wants their daughter to go after.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And something inside was just like, there's something about that guy. Something in my needy soul gravitated toward that guy. And I just kept turning around.
There's a hand grenade. I'm going to go jump on it.
Poor guy. We became friends recently. Actually, I connected with him on Facebook because I had written a lot in my book about him, and we've talked about that, but I wanted to make sure he was okay with what I had written. And he was completely supportive of everything that I wrote. And, he's like, hey, it's great. I'm happy for you. So he actually was adopted, and he had his own wounds. He was adopted by this older couple, and they never watched anything he did. They were like in their 70s when they adopted him, and maybe 60s. And so he just did whatever. But we kind of started talking because my friend knew of him, and I had her call him one day, and we started hanging out. And within a few months, everything had flipped, and he started talking about, should I get some condoms? And I'm like, what? I don't think that's going to happen anytime soon. And he ended up, I'll just get some to have on hand, But inside, I felt like if I didn't do that, then I was going to lose him. And, that's probably the super common thing that young women think. If you don't have any self-worth, or you don't have an identity, or think you're worth more than that, this is what I'm trying to teach my daughters. If that's how you lead with your body, you lead with your sexuality, you give away all the candy in the candy store, it's really empty. There's nothing there to build a foundation. And then I wish someone had told me that sex is reserved for the covenant marriage relationship, and that's it. And you don't get the blessing when you are doing that outside of marriage. You just get pain and disappointment. That's what I got.
Yeah.
So we
And
stand. Go ahead.
it's again, it's time after time we see such a lack of discipleship and a lack of things that come up that where your identity is not firmly in Jesus Christ, and you
Yeah.
run into these buzzsaws of self doubt, the world, value, trying to fit in to the world instead of fitting in with Christ, you know, and
Yeah,
and
I
it just
know.
leads to catastrophe, and we really have to do a better job with that. Some, so again, my heart breaks for it because this happens day in and day out, and to know it happened to you, and then but the great thing is we know that how it ends, right, which is the
Yes.
good part. So where do
Yeah.
we go from here?
I said I wasn't gonna I'm gonna speed it up a little. But so that guy and he ushered me into my first drinking experience, and we drank together. It opened the door for the next 11 years. I felt completely transformed the first time I drank. It removed all of my anxiety. It removed
Mhm.
feelings of low self-worth or worrying about how people viewed me. I felt like I had found what was missing from my life. Alcohol did so much for me in the beginning. It enabled me to talk without self appraisal, without just
Gave you
critically.
confidence.
Yes, so much confidence. It was magical. And so once I drank, a lot of people don't remember the first time they drank, but I will never forget it. And the decision I made that night was I can't wait to drink again as soon as possible and as frequently as possible. So that ushered in 11 years of blackout binge drinking. Right away, as soon as I got my license, I was drinking and driving. I would borrow my dad's truck and I would do all sorts of reckless things, driving the wrong way down the highway. I could tell you many stories like that, but I won't. But the things God spared me of, because I was always driving drunk and somehow made it home. Near overdoses, waking up not knowing how I got somewhere. Oh, I went out to this party and then I woke up, I don't know where. I woke up in the backseat of a car one time. I've woke up in my vomit several times. Bedwetting. I mean, this is embarrassing stuff. It was basically
Yeah.
blackouts, bedwetting, and sexual shame. I mean, when you are so drunk that you wet the bed, this is not normal. And I was doing that when I was 16. And I just thought, I have to somehow get this under control. But I will say one thing is that I always had conviction. I always hated myself the next day, and I had so much shame, and I knew it was wrong, and I knew that I had a problem, but I kept looking for the next way to escape it, like the next time I could experience it again, because I always thought it would be different. So during high school, my boyfriend left for the army. You talked about your girlfriend leaving you. Well, he left me, and so I just moved on to someone else. But was another abandonment. I was on the swimming team. I did well. I won writing awards. I made pretty good grades. The reason I made good grades was because I didn't want any kind of punishment. Because even though I said my dad was a man who never grew up, he was very strict, and he was very irrational in his discipline, where he had certain things that he was very hardcore about. You could say, oh, I'm spending the weekend at Sally's house, and then they wouldn't check. But if I brought home a C, I would be in a lot of trouble and I would get grounded. So as long as I appeared to be doing the right things, that saved me from any investigation. So I looked like I was doing all right. I didn't want any punishments that would hamper my weekend drinking binges. But throughout high school, I had a succession of boyfriends. My senior year, I had a new boyfriend. When I turned 18, we got an apartment together. And so right away, I moved into this pattern of trying to find a man to tether myself to, that I needed to have a host in order to survive. Like I can't be alone. I mean, the thought of it was just mind boggling to me. I always had a boyfriend. So I moved in with that guy, and we got engaged, and I started college, and things were going okay. But then, it would always create chaos, and that's what drinking would do. And this guy thought I had a drinking problem. He was actually quite stable. He's married now too, been married like 30 years probably. But I almost married that guy. And he told me, Melissa, I think you have a drinking problem, when I was 18. And I said, you're nuts. I mean, 18-year-olds aren't alcoholics. And I just went off on him. And so I ended up cheating on him with someone I worked with. And this was my daughter Haley's dad. And I just tried to make him into a husband material, even though, when we're approaching a
So you had a
relationship.
squared away guy and you went for a fixer upper instead.
Yes, you're absolutely
What a
right.
surprise.
Oh, I know. Want the bad boys, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I want something not good for me. I had a
Yeah.
stable guy who actually was in love with me. He worked 2 jobs. He was really good to his parents. A lot of the things were very good with him. The only thing I found out later was that he couldn't have children. I found out later, which would have been really sad, but he's a very loyal guy. He never would have cheated on me. And I really did him dirty. I have actually spoken to him. It was probably 20 years ago we talked, but I repented for how I treated him. I wasn't happy. I wanted to marry him because I thought it was going to fix me, but he wanted to wait a while. He wanted to wait till he was done with college. So because he wasn't willing to comply with my wishes, I started looking elsewhere, and I started looking into, oh, Sammy, brother Sammy says my story can be a movie. Thank you, brother Sammy. I'm sure there's a lot of women who've gone through this same thing. I know a lot of it's similar, but he wouldn't commit. So I had this job at a convenience store, and I started, befriending this guy there. And he was very deep and brooding and introspective. He was very intellectual, and he wasn't into sports or displays of physical fitness like the guy I was with. He was completely different. And we bonded on a deep emotional level. And this will probably segue into when I talk about the trauma in my marriage, because that's what happened. We started bonding. We were spending lots of time together at work, and we kept pushing it a little farther and a little farther. And then one night he's like, hey, you just want to go cruise around and like cruise down Wisconsin Point? And it's like Lake Superior on this remote beach. So we got some beer and we did that. And I ended up getting drunk and sleeping with him. And never would have happened if I had been drunk. I'm not excusing it. I'm just saying most of the bad choices I made were because I was drunk. And so then that happened. And I had done something I couldn't go back from. And I confessed it to my boyfriend. He wanted to work things out with me, but instead I continued to see the other guy. I continued to be deceptive. So ultimately I left the stable guy for the gas station guy. And we went into a whirlwind of drinking, partying. We rented a house with another guy, and we had this party house. And I was trying to mold him into husband material because that was always my mission with people. And he, eventually we got engaged, but I don't think he really wanted to, because he showed me lots of red flags of why he was having some second thoughts. And then I ended up getting pregnant. And then he was kind of like, well, I'm going to do the right thing. Right. And his parents were Catholic, and his parents were very stable people and good people. And they wanted him to have a Catholic wedding. And we did all this nonsense for that. And we lied to the priest and said we weren't living together and everything. So I was 21 when I got married to him. And that night I remember knowing that I was doing the wrong thing. I knew that I made a big mistake. And at the reception, he got trashed and everyone was drunk. I wasn't, because I was pregnant. And I was just looking at these people on the dance floor and thinking, what have I done? What have I done? I mean, you should not be thinking that on your wedding night, right?
No.
And he grabbed the DJ mic at the end of the dance and he said, thanks everyone for coming. We're off to consummate our marriage. I was like, wow, that was a classy one. That was a real classy one.
You were a picker boy back then.
My picker was broken. He actually is a good guy. I think what I did was try to force him into something he didn't want. And when we were just partying together, that was just fine for him. He didn't want to commit. But so after that, we decided to move to Kansas City. So we made some really dramatic life changes that I really thought were going to save me. This is just a demonstration of my geographical escapes, because I thought we could get away from his friends who I thought were bad influences, get away from Duluth Superior, which I hated, get away from Wisconsin, and go to Kansas City. His parents were from Kansas City, and they had moved north for work or whatever reason people come north. So we had a great plan. We're going to move to Kansas City. We're going to have our kid there, and we're going to have this wonderful life. So we get to Kansas City, and I'm just like raging homesick. Why? Because I have no identity. And I'm away from anything I ever knew. I don't even have my mom. My dad was at the work farm for his multiple drunk driving arrests. So he was at a minimum security prison camp. The day that I got married, his probation officer allowed him to come walk me down the aisle. But he had been getting multiple DUI arrests. And So my mom was devastated
What
that I was
what year
leaving.
was this?
So this is 1994.
I was gonna
My
say, yeah, because I
How do my
remember
timelines
clearly.
go?
Your timeline's great, but I remember where DUI wasn't even a thing. Like you
Oh,
and I are the
yeah.
same age, and like cops
Yep.
didn't even care. It was like, do you have any drugs in the car? And the jerk
Yes.
cops would take your booze, and the cool cops, once they searched your car and didn't find anything, you were on your way. Like it was not a thing. Like I
Yeah.
like at all, and obviously it is now, and there's been a ton of trauma and lost lives and everything. I'm not just saying. I'm just saying that when you hear people, talking about the past, like DUI was very, very rarely, if ever, prosecuted or even a thing.
Yes. Yeah, you're right, and my parents lived out in the country, so a lot of times, if they're leaving the bar, the constable or whatever would pull them over, and my dad would make up some bogus excuse like, "My contact fell out." I remember him telling these stories like, "Hey, I got one over on the cops. My contact fell out. That's why I was weaving." And they would say, "Okay, we'll follow you home or give you a ride home," you know?
Yeah, that's what the cops used to do all the time. And
Yeah.
I mean, it's just remarkable. I just want, if somebody is watching this with a modern, how we sometimes judge people backwards to the current standard, and it's just, I know it sounds horrible, it is horrible, but just understand that it was what everyone did. You turned
It
16,
was.
all your friends piled in your car, you went, got a buyer, and you drove around doing it.
Yeah.
And it's
Yes.
terrible, but holy smokes.
That's totally what we did. I mean, we lived in the same time period, Jason, and a lot of my friends were doing this too, and my girlfriends, but the thing I noticed is that I was so much worse than them. I
Yeah, you
didn't
didn't
have
have an
any.
off switch.
Exactly. I didn't have control. Once I put it in my body, people would look at me and be like, "She gets crazier with every sip." I would become more irrational, more out of control. I'd black out, I
Yeah.
would do
Most
stuff. Yeah.
most people, once they have that first experience where they throw up their guts up everywhere, they're like, all right, I need to stop before I hit that point.
I know. I wish
You
and I
know?
wanted to do that. That's what half my story is about, is trying to control it and trying to do it like I see normal people do it.
Yeah,
And
my dad talks about that. My dad has been,
yeah,
clean and sober now 30 plus years, maybe even
praise
more.
God.
And he talks about, he's like, I don't have an off switch like you guys do. Like you
Yep.
guys are normal, like meaning people that don't have a problem with alcohol. You can drink and you can say, hey, I'm gonna get a little buzzed. He's like, I can't. I have one and I gotta take it all the way until blackout and God knows what happens.
Yes, me and your dad are twins. It's like the AA saying one is too many and 1,000 is not enough.
Yeah, exactly. So
That's
where do we
how.
go from here?
Yeah, so we've gone through. So 91 was when I graduated, and then I had, lived with that one boyfriend, cheated on him, ended up with my husband, first husband. We moved to Kansas City in 1994, and I was really homesick. I didn't have any sense of stability or anything really to cling to. I was just I was having a lot of panic attacks when we got there. We both found jobs, and then he got fired from his job because he got in a car accident with the work vehicle. So things started to unravel very quickly there, where he started a bartending job. He wasn't coming home at night, and I was panicking a lot. So very quickly on, I started devising a plan to go back north. You do that a lot when you're in addiction. You keep looking for external things to fix what's wrong with you inside. You think another move's going to help, or a new
New
job.
town and fresh start and
Yes,
do all the. Now, part of that can be it. One of the things
it
that
can
I
be good.
try to advise people is if you're going to give yourself to the Lord and you go into one of these residential discipleship programs, and like
Mhm.
that's why a lot of people do so well in Ken Graves' program is they go up to Maine, they know no one. They just
Yeah, that
they
is
just
good.
they know no one. They have no muscle memory. They have no relationships. They have nothing to remind them of anything. It's a complete new start, and they stay there. And that's great. What too often happens, they go back to their hometown and they drive by that bar that they've gone into 6,000 times and they turn right back in.
Yeah. No, you're right about that. It can be extremely life changing for people to get out of their circumstances and just go someplace completely different. If we had been stable, it may have been a good thing for us, but we were both, messed up, and he was drinking a lot, but I was pregnant, so I couldn't. And so, anyway, I just repeated the cycle. I wanted to go home after a short time. I wanted to move back home. And I knew that that was going to be the end of us. I had a moment of clarity, and God would show me things sometimes, even though I wasn't seeking Him. I got confirmed when I was 16, and then I left the church. My parents wanted me to go through the required stuff in the Presbyterian church. So I went through confirmation. And that night I got picked up by some guys in a Trans Am and I went to a gravel pit and drank. But I did recite and memorize all the stuff. And my teacher patted me on the head and said I did a good job. But I left church at 16. My first husband and I had absolutely no interest or anything to do with church. It was all just for his parents' sake, what we did. But I had a moment of clarity where I felt like God said to me, this is what I felt. And I don't say this lightly. I don't go around saying God speaks to me all the time, but it was the night before we were moving back up north. And I had my daughter, Haley. She was like a week old. And I felt him say, your marriage is not going to survive another move. And I knew it. I just knew. I'm like, this is going to be the end of us. So we went back north very quickly. He told me he wanted a divorce. And one day he just said, I want a divorce. I don't love you. I don't want to be with you.
Yeah. So he brought you back home to drop you off.
Kind of. I mean, actually another year passed and things were steadily declining. We both went into bartending jobs. I mean, you can see how wonderful this would be for a marriage. And my ex, Jason, you would not believe this, if I would have known what I know now, what I put up with, I mean, he was addicted to sports and video games, 100%. And, I was annoyed by it, but I didn't realize how dysfunctional it was, because if he had a day off, he'd open his eyes, turn on ESPN, and it would not stop until the end of the day, or it would be, and this was in the 90s. So it was ESPN and Sega, or him going to work at his bartending job.
Yep.
So that was my life.
What that is that's a miserable person who has no calling, who is just checking out, right? You're checking out in the sports world. You're checking out in the Sega, in the video games, and you have nothing else. You have nothing else that excites you. The job pays the bills. And that's so often, that is so many men in marriage right now. Never mind men out of marriage, right? Where they trade their real life for a fantasy in a game, or living by proxy through a sports athlete or team.
You're so right. I mean, he knew every stat, like in fantasy football and dart league, these were his activities. And I look at it and it blows my mind now, where I was trying to make that work. And I was like 23. I didn't want a divorce. So for 9 months, I want to park here for a minute, because I have felt a lot of shame and condemnation for being divorced. And I want to just illustrate how hard I tried to make it work. But thanks to Jesus, he let me out of it, and he showed me, this isn't what I have for you. But I tried for 9 months to reconcile with him. I mean, he moved out. He went and moved in with some of his friends from the bar. And I wept and pined and begged and did all the wrong things, I'm sure, looked desperate and unattractive. But every week would be like, have you changed your mind? Have you changed your mind? After 9 months, he told me, will you give me another chance? And I said, yeah, I will. Come back. I did exactly what Paul describes in 1 Corinthians 7. I waited and hoped to reconcile. And so we did reconcile for 6 months, and then the same pattern emerged. Same thing, going out all night, not coming home. I was at so-and-so's house, can't verify the stories, smoking weed constantly. So we came to the end of that, and I just said, I can't live like this. I just can't do this. And he's like, all right, well, see you later. So that's how it ended. And the thing that's interesting about that is that our divorce date was 9/4/97, the day we filed. The day I married Mike was 9/4/04. So exactly 7 years to the day from my filing for divorce from him, and marrying Mike was 7 years. And
Awesome.
I never noticed that before I was writing the book. But anyway, that marriage ended. God gave me peace. And then for the first time, I lived alone. I lived alone with my daughter, who was then 2. And I was forced to learn how to not rely on a man for everything. And no, I wasn't sober, but I was, binge drinking throughout the week, bartending, trying to finish college. I was a bartender, karaoke DJ. Wasn't doing everything the best, because as you know, I have a lot of problems with my oldest daughter. And some of them are from what it was like for her. I mean, she wishes she had an intact family, and she thinks I pushed her dad into marriage. She sees it through the lens of all the things I did wrong, and doesn't see much about his side of things.
That's very easily to do until you realize how hard life is, right? When you're a kid, it's really easy to judge your parents and all the mistakes they make. And we should own every one of those mistakes. And I know you have. But once you start getting some years under your belt and you understand that, hey, this thing called life, is hard. And when we make, bad decisions, it gets way harder and it starts an avalanche of hardness, right?
Yeah.
So now you're a single mom, divorcee with a kid, trying to work your way through college, trying to, do the right things, trying to, you know, doing the best you can because you don't know any better.
Yeah.
And, it just, of course, um, it's really easy to judge until that. But, the key to mending those relationships, and I know you've done this, is owning your mistakes, right?
Yes.
Like, my dad, who was a complete mess up, right? And not a part of my life and a ghost and would call me occasionally tanked from Florida every 5 years to on a birthday he remembered. Um, you know, I could move forward with him sooner than I could move forward with my mother, who was around more. Right,
Yeah.
she has her own issues. Me and her have our own issues because he owned it all first.
Right.
He came
Yeah.
to me completely humble and
Mm,
said,
a lot.
"I screwed everything up. You have every right to not want to be a part of me. You don't want to be around me."
Yeah.
And I just was happy to have him in my life. You know,
Yeah.
and I just accepted him for and moved on because he did that. Now my mom and I still have, she doesn't like that I allowed him back into my life at certain times. We're working through that, and I've got a great relationship with both of them now, and I'm
That's great.
really working on through that. But it starts with repentance and owning it and repenting for it.
Yeah, you're so right. Yep. And I think that's why she has a better or had a better relationship with her dad. I don't even know if they ever talked about anything. I just think I was the one who was there and my
Yep.
mistakes were more evident, or the things I
Hmm.
did wrong. But
Well,
so
it's easy to
during
create an imaginary, he would have been perfect and I would have been a
yeah,
princess and all that stuff. So again, be gentle on yourself here.
yeah, I think our relationship isn't the worst. It's not the best and it's not the worst, but we do love each other and I know she yeah, I'll just leave it at that. But so from 24 to 26, I was bartending, karaoke DJ. I was a mobile DJ. So I have two sound systems. I would haul, I didn't haul both of them. Well, I would because I wanted a backup system. I would haul 2 amps, but I would traverse the state of Minnesota and Wisconsin, driving all over the state to make a couple $100 at these gigs. And I would do weddings, school dances, rural places 4 hours away. My mom hated this. She thought I had a car that wasn't very reliable. And so my daughter would go to grandparents and this is what I would do in order to make enough money to live. I guess I could have been doing something worse. But I'd get drunk at these events too, and I'd drive home drunk. I don't know how God spared me from driving off the road and all the stuff he did. But during that time, I crossed paths with Mike Huray, which is kind of funny and interesting because I was really struggling financially, and I got this girl to move in with me, and she only lived with me for about 6 months because she turned out to be very unstable and didn't pay the bills. But while she was there, she said, "Oh, there's this guy I know. I used to date him. He's going to come over and install a shower for us because we lived in this old duplex that was one step above a tenement. I still drive by it when I'm in Superior because I like to just look at where I once lived and not to disparage anybody that lives there, but I think of how much of a struggle it was when I lived there, and I
Sure.
with windows that leaked and you're paying $200 a month for heat and the windows are just leaking like a sieve,
Yep.
but so she moved in with me. Theoretically to help pay the rent. So the one day she had this guy over and she's like, "This is Mike Huray." So I met Mike. I met Mike one time when I was 25, and that was it. Never thought of him again or really saw him again. He was just injected into my life for one afternoon, and I was deep in my addiction at that time, and I didn't even think give him a second. Actually, I thought he's kind of cute. I thought I wonder why how they know each other because she seems so unstable.
Yeah.
But my drinking continued until I was 26, and then this is the next significant thing that happened is that I was getting more reckless in the things I would do. Just meeting people, going off with them in their cars, going over to their houses, waking up, don't know how I got here. And then I got a DUI in 1999 in January. And I felt a little bit ashamed, but a lot of my friends told me, "Oh, don't worry, lots of people get one. It's not a big deal, just be more careful." So I didn't stop drinking. I just thought I'd be more careful about drinking and driving. So I continued on my same usual path I was going. And then 9 months later, I got a second one. But this time I rear ended a lady in a blackout, and I drove across the bridge from Duluth into Superior. I was blacked out. I rear ended someone, stopped at the stoplight at the foot of the bridge. And I don't remember it, but I fled the scene and went to a convenience store. So the next thing I remembered was just kind of like being in this convenience store. And people that don't black out, sometimes they don't believe that people black out, or they may think you're making that up because you don't want to be held responsible for what you did. That's not the case. It is really like amnesia that happens when you drink so much or so fast. Your blood alcohol rises rapidly and inhibits memory storage. You have short-term memory, so you would be able to be in a conversation for like a minute, but you can actually test if someone's in a blackout by asking them things 2 minutes later and they're not going to remember it. You cannot store memories. So I came out of it, and there were all these police at the convenience store, and they came up and asked me if I'd been in an accident. And I just like kind of nodded my head because I figured they must know what they're talking about. So I went to jail that night, and that was the first time I was ever really, I had some minimal brushes with the law. Like I had many driving after suspension tickets, drinking underage, and minor frequenting, stuff like that. But this second DUI was pretty serious, and they told me I could go to serve jail time and all this stuff. So I was like scared straight, and that happens to a lot of people in addiction, where you think, I need to like do something. This is serious. So I quit drinking. And I went to court, and they said, we want you to do an outpatient treatment. We want you to go to AA and get a sponsor. You're going to have a probation officer. So they did all that stuff. And I tried to transform my life. And I went to this kind of rinky-dink treatment where it was a 12-step program. We just basically sat around and talked, and then we wrote out stuff about the step work. And I did that, and I went to AA. And like, I know your dad isn't heavily involved in AA, and I think it helps a lot of people. And it was helpful during that 18 months. I met a lot of people who were trying to not drink. So in that regard, it was good to meet people who weren't going out to the bars every night. There was a lot I didn't like about it that I felt was disempowering. I didn't like having to say I'm Melissa and I'm an alcoholic. And I didn't like having to live from that identity of all the, it felt like living from the shame. So there were a lot of things I struggled with, but I stayed sober for 18 months, and I didn't think it was that difficult. I went back to church. Actually went to a non-denominational church for the first time, and it was a spirit-filled church. I had never been really exposed to that, but I did water baptism. And then this is just kind of an interesting little side note. They said, hey, now that you've been water baptized, we want to baptize you in the gifts of the Holy Spirit. And I was like, well, what is that? And I was like, these people are a little out there. Like, I don't really know how I feel about all that. So I decided the church was kind of woo-woo, and I didn't want it. So I also, they were telling my daughter that the devil could get into her mind if she didn't put on the helmet of salvation. And I didn't understand the armor of God back then either. So I just left the church and just quit. And shortly after that, I started to feel, here's something I just would like to point out is, so I was sober, but one of the big problems was that I was very resentful about it. And I was bitter. I was self-pitying.
You were pissed you couldn't drink.
Exactly. Yeah, very, very much so. And I had started a new job at a TV station. I started in the production department because my degree was in mass communications, and I wanted to quit all the driving across the state for the gigs. So I got this entry-level position at a TV station as a production assistant. And a lot of the people there were young. I mean, they smoked weed. They would smoke between the newscasts. They'd be smoking up in their car. And then every night after the show, they'd go over to the bar. There was a bar like right across the parking lot from the station. And I felt really left out. I felt cheated. And I felt I was really hating the hand I'd been dealt. So I think, the enemy starts to attack our mind and tell us, you weren't really that bad. I think if you tried it now, you'd be able to do it. You just haven't really tried controlled drinking, given it a decent effort. So I began to ruminate on these thoughts. And for about 3 months, I didn't act on them. But I didn't do anything about it. I didn't seek any outside counsel. Well, I went to my AA meetings, but I started to hate them even more. Actually, to go so far as to make lists of all the stuff I hated about the meeting. So instead of being in the meeting engaged, I would be like writing what annoyed me about the meeting. And yeah, so it was only a matter of time. They say a relapse what do they say? You know, the actual ingesting of the chemical is not the relapse. It begins in your thinking. Smoked weeds between newscast. I love it. Yeah, they were always messing up the chyron, Sammy. They were always making typing errors on the graphics because, you know, but some of them could function really well being stoned. I'm sure it was better than being drunk and trying to operate technical equipment. But yeah, so it was only a matter of time before I was going to act on the thoughts. And my uncle got married, and I decided to drink at his wedding. And that night I drove home drunk. And I had been sober for 18 months, and then I decided to drink. And that night I was just right back in. It was like a bad penny. I was back.
Wow.
Yeah, was back on the highway to hell. So I stayed in it for another 2 years. I'm going to fast track this. Stayed in it for another 2 years, 2001 to 2003. But in 2002, my dad died of liver failure. He had had a long battle with alcoholism. He was 54.
Wow, so young.
Yeah, 54. Didn't seem that young when I was 30.
But 30, 50 seems forever, and now we're both 50.
I know. I can't believe he died at 54. And I love my dad. He was a gifted musician. He was a great writer. People loved him when he was sober. He was never abusive or, you know, horrible man. But he died, and then I stared at him in his hospital bed in hospice, and I was like, I'm never going to drink again. And that was the first time I had that thought, really, of never going to drink again. And actually the thought was, please God, don't ever let me drink again. And I stayed sober for about a month. And then we had his memorial service, and I just got wrecked out of my mind. And people said, oh, you're probably just upset about your dad's thing. And that wasn't it at all. It really wasn't that. I just wanted to drink. So I had 6 more relapses after he died, but God was really getting my attention because I was going to new lows. I was just having devastating consequences, more internally than externally, but the shame, the self-hatred, the just hating myself and knowing that I had to stop. And each time, you know, I'd do it, the madness would be back. I mean, I would put together a month or two of sobriety, and then I'd pick it up again. And in one night, the madness would be back. And I'd wake up having a full-blown panic attack, run to the window looking for my car. I'd be like weeping and trying to piece together, there was someone here last night. Like, did I bring somebody home? Is my stuff here? You know, it's just like the insanity. That's what I couldn't live with. It wasn't even the legal stuff. It was the shame and the horror of that I can't trust myself, or once I take a sip, I cannot say what's going to happen. Will I have 1? Will I have 24? So I finally came to the last time on August 21st, 2003. And most of you know this story, but I had been sober 49 days. I was white knuckling it, not liking it. The whole time I had been white knuckling it, trying to keep it together. And I decided to go from Duluth down here to the Twin Cities where I live now, to the Minnesota State Fair in St. Paul. And I took a guy with me who was an acquaintance I had dated for a while, but we weren't currently dating. So he came, he's like, yeah, this will be fun. Let's go on a road trip. He's very much like the guy at the back of the bus, just a really happy-go-lucky, affable guy. Yeah, he didn't know I was like off the chain in my progression of alcoholism. So on the way down there, I said, hey, I'm an alcoholic. And he's like, no, you're not. You're fine. What are you talking about? He's like, lots of people get a couple DUIs. It's no big deal. So that sealed the deal. And I just decided to drink one more time. And I had like a 12-hour blackout. I came to the next morning in a strange motel room. Didn't know how I got there. He was there. He was telling me, Melissa, we got to go get your car. I think it was towed. I'm like, my car? Last thing I remembered was like the night before at sunset. We were at a concert, Boston and Night Ranger. Supposed to be there for a good time. You know, that's how it is for people like you, Jason. Like normal people with an off switch. You go to a party or a festival or something, it's like a good time. You're gonna have a couple beers and have fun. For me, it was a nightmare horror show because I was falling down the stairs at the grandstand. I was blacked out. I couldn't walk. The police took us aside on the way out because they could see I couldn't walk. They were like trying to figure out who he was and was he coming with me? Did somebody slip something in her drink? They wanted to take me to detox. He said, no, I'll look out for her. So I almost went alone, actually. I almost went alone. I had met him the day before at some event. We ran into each other. I said, hey, I'm going to the fair tomorrow. You want to come? I mean, what if I would have gone alone? I think, I think it would have been much worse, or it could have been. So I like to think that God put him in my path to kind of save my life that night. And the next morning I was in such misery and such horror that I just begged God to never let me drink again. And I screamed. I just cried out to God and I said, I repent. I didn't say those words, but what I said was, please don't ever let me drink again. I want to be done. I want to live for you. I'll do anything you want if you just help me never drink again. And I didn't
And
realize the enormity of it in the moment, but it unfolded as time went on.
so you're how old at that point?
30. I was 30 years old. So it was
Okay.
20 years ago.
So
That was the day.
11 years of pain and darkness, and now 30 years old, you're done.
Yeah, it was more 15 years because it was 15 to 30, but I did have the 18 months of sobriety in there. But yes, I was done with the drinking. The drinking piece was gone. And I will say that God did radically free me of that, in that he removed the craving and the obsession and the mental preoccupation. That part is absolutely
were you
true.
still bitter that you couldn't do it?
Nope.
No.
It was like a
So it was
switch had
just, I
flipped.
want nothing to do with that. It turned you off. Okay, great.
It was like it had been lifted off me. And if other people did it, I mean, I didn't care. I could now go to events, even if my coworkers had going away parties and, at that bar. And I didn't spend a lot of time in bars, but if I had a reason to be somewhere, it didn't bother me at all. I wanted nothing to do with it. I knew it was going to be my ruin. And I had moments of clarity where I felt God saying, you're going to die of it. When I was about 28, I started to feel you're not going to make it to 30. You're going to die of an overdose or a drunk driving accident if you don't stop. And I would push the thought away and push it away. But that was kind of what I believed was going to happen. So I was completely done with it at 30, and I haven't looked back.
All right. So you've dealt with how you've been dealing with your wounds, which was alcohol. Yeah. Right. But they are still there, or are they healed as well?
I had no more anxiety. Because alcohol, it treats anxiety in the beginning, as with anything, you build a tolerance and then it begins to create the problem you think it's treating. So it started to create more anxiety, more panic, more dysfunction, more depression, the rebounding effect, the coming off of it. I had a terrible panic attacks and anxiety. So I had no more anxiety once I stopped drinking. And I wasn't depressed, and I didn't smoke, drink, or take diet pills, which I had been addicted to ephedrine for as long as I could remember. So I quit all of that. And so then the next thing that happened is that I was still working at the news station. I had moved up to a reporter. I had really worked my way up because people in the production department generally didn't get on air. And this was probably part of my wound. I wish I don't have this anymore, like this desire to be seen and to be like, oh, you've made something of yourself, or you're a community representative. You're on the news. Even though it was, small market news, I still thought it was a big deal. And when I was addicted in doing this, I thought it sort of made up for the bad stuff I was doing at night, being blacked out in bars and then being on the news the next day. I mean, I was hungover all the time when I was on the news. I wasn't drunk on the news, but so once I quit drinking, I almost suddenly wanted to leave that job. I didn't want the thing I had worked so hard for. And I was the weekend anchor too. And I started trying to find a way to get out of that job. I didn't want it. I didn't want to be on the air. I didn't care. So I decided I wanted to go back to school for addiction counseling. And it was something that had come up in a study I did at church where I wanted to, I want to be an addiction counselor. And I had met Mike. Mike came into my life on September 9th, 2003. And we had met 5 years before that at my apartment very briefly. But I went to a news story. It was a pie throwing contest, dumb story. I didn't want to cover it. I thought it was beneath me. It was primary election day and I wanted a cooler story at some kind of candidates, party, and they sent me this pie throwing thing. And I was like, why, God? I don't know if I said that, but I went over there and I crossed paths with Mike and I was like, oh my gosh, don't we know each other? So we started catching up. We started talking. We started seeing each other and we got married a year later. And I continued at the news job until 2005 when the station closed. But then I went to school to be an addiction counselor. And I had been trying to leave Duluth, Jason. I think I've talked about this a lot. I've had a couple points in my life where I wanted so badly for God to do something and he wasn't doing it. And one of those was wanting a job in a big market and sending out resume tapes. They don't do that anymore, but sending out tapes to every market in town. I was willing to go to Flint, Michigan, or wherever I had to go to get to my next step. And I'd get some interviews and I'd get some interest, but I did not get any job offers. And I was pounding my head against the wall, wondering why. And then I ended up meeting Mike that fall. And so I believe that he kept me in Duluth for a reason. So we got married in 2004. And then this is kind of the second part. I know we're getting into the time here, but life was great with Mike for a long time. We got married and we talked a lot about our values. He's the first man I ever did things the right way with, where I didn't approach the physical part before the spiritual and emotional part, or like I need to keep you with my body in order to get you to
Were you a Christian
commit.
at this point? Were
Yeah. I mean, we had talked, I was a Christian because I guess I didn't talk enough about that, but I had gone back to church during my 18 months of sobriety. I said that. And then as soon as I became sober, every time I'd want to get back to church. I started attending a Lutheran church where my mom had been going, actually. My mom's like, I think you'd really like this pastor. You should come check out Grace Church. So I started going there, and I was in an alpha group, and I did a study on, I'm kind of embarrassed about this, on the purpose-driven life. I'm not the biggest fan of that anymore, but or Rick Warren for that matter. But at the time when I was in that study, I felt, I believe the Lord was telling me, I want you to use what you've been through to help others. And so that's where I came to the conclusion of being an addiction counselor, which is not at all rare among recovered people, right? They all think they want to be a counselor. And it's like, oh, I want to help people. And you're on fire for that. And that's good. There's actually an old AA joke. The only thing you need to be a counselor is like a big book, a felony, and an addiction, or I can't remember how it goes, but they didn't really used to have many credentials back then. But yeah, I was on fire to help people, and I thought I'd never get sick of doing groups. And that was really what I wanted to do. So Mike and I were going to that Lutheran church, and we gotten involved in a lot of things there, the Alpha, and we did a Bible study, and we were really loving that church. And Haley was coming too. So it was just the three of us, Mike, Haley, and me. And Mike was a great stepdad to her. So he's been in her life since she was 9. That's a pretty long run. I mean, so it's 19 years that he's been a solid factor in her life. And I will say about her dad, he was in her life throughout the duration, albeit, how do I put it? The minimum, I guess, maybe once a week or every other week, she would go spend the night with him. So, okay. And he remarried the year before I did and has been married to her ever since. But we were in church and we were doing well. So this is where I'm going to get to the second part, and I'll fast track it. I keep saying that. But Mike and I had a great first 4 years. I mean, things were going wonderful. We were very involved in church. We spent a lot of time connecting, talking about how what we wanted, our values. We both wanted to pursue God. We wanted to have children and raise them in a godly home. We wanted to grow old together. I never really talked about this with anybody, just deep things like that. We'd spend hours doing that. And then we had our 2 daughters. Macy was born in 2008 and Emmy was born in 2010. So at that point, we've got, 2 small children. Say we go out a few years, 2 small children. Haley is 15. And then we have the 2 younger girls, almost the same as you guys. And Haley was experiencing some stress, some problems at school and things with anxiety and body image and all this stuff. And it was getting a little tough. And we started to have some stressful times. And same like you've talked about, Jason, I felt like we had no support and family. We didn't have stable family that could help us. We didn't have money just for sitters or ways to, I suppose we could have gotten more creative about it. But it became very much like running a household, and he would have 1 kid and I would have 1 kid. And then Haley would have what we had left, sadly, but she was in high school and was more involved with speech and her stuff she was doing. But we were very consumed with the small kids and lack of money, and it started to get really stressful. And Mike's dad was really sick during that time. Mike, as you know, it's like his role in life has been to care for his family. And every one of his siblings has had some sort of physical or mental disability except for him. Mike was the only one to go to college. And he's cared for his stepmother until she passed away and his dad. So he was caregiving with his dad, who was in a nursing home. He would be over there every day. He would go just make sure his dad would eat, because they were understaffed, make sure the dressings were changed on his legs, all that stuff. And very, Mike takes a sense of over responsibility for stuff, and at his own expense sometimes. Even though you see his heart and you really admire it, you see the toll that it takes on him.
Sure.
And so he's doing that along with these other 2 kids we have, and a teenager who's struggling with some stuff, and his dad's dying. And he's feeling, I think Mike always wanted something from his dad that he never got. And he's shared that too. He wanted his dad. His dad was an old World War II veteran who never shared his feelings or said, I love you, or you did a good job. And Mike, when he was 12, he had his own paper route. He'd be getting up at 4 a.m. going and delivering papers. He paid for his own braces. He never asked anybody for anything. And everything he did was on his own. And they didn't like push him to do anything. They were very hands-off parents. But so he was giving and giving to his dad till the end. And then his dad died, and he never got that kind of, conversation he hoped to have with him.
Yeah. Part of Mike's wound and testimony.
Yes, it is. And I know you know this, and I'm just saying it to kind of illustrate what happened, not as an excuse, but just sort of to explain some things that led into us and what happened in our marriage. But it was when his dad was dying, we were praying at his bedside, and we were really afraid for his soul. And we believe he could hear us, but it was so heavy on our heart, and we should have done this sooner, but praying that he would go to Jesus, that he would accept Jesus if he hadn't. And that was a really special time between Mike and me, kneeling at his dad's bedside and praying that. But then he died, and selfishly, this is selfish of me, he was 86, and I selfishly thought, well, he was older, he lived a long life. I'm sure that, Mike is going to grieve for a while, but, everything will get back to normal soon. And instead of that, Mike became very, very depressed and very distant. And at that time, I also started grad school, which was really bad timing as far as me starting grad school when I had a 3-month-old baby. And I was starting this intensive program. Looking back, that wasn't the wisest choice. And Mike was picking up a lot of the slack during that time. And we had a conversation about it, and perhaps he didn't share his true feelings, but he was supportive of me doing it. But it ended up with him taking on a lot more of the load. And that's kind of where our splintering started to happen, although it had been leading up to that. But we were no longer connecting. Church was inconvenient. We had no godly friends. Those are all important things, that we were not connected to godly people. And we were just really isolated. And the distance grew. The distance was growing. I was in this program, and he was busy with work. So this went on until early 2011. And I was feeling that things were not well in our marriage. But that's one of my problems that I've worked really hard on, is not being conflict avoidant, because that's what got us into the mess we were in. And we both knew it was a problem, but we weren't really talking about it. And I thought, well, it'll get better. Yep. And meanwhile, I was trying to reach out to Mike, and I kept getting not rebuked, but I kept getting kind of brushed off, like, well, I'm fine. Or I would make a bid to connect with him, and I would feel like it wasn't reciprocated. So I started to just kind of give up, and I started talking to this guy at the gym. And it was very innocent at first. The reason I want to illustrate this is I think it's very dangerous to ever get into any kind of emotional connection like that with somebody other than your spouse. Even when you think it's harmless, or you're just being friends. And you can have, opposite sex friends, of course, but when you're crossing a line to where you're feeling excited to see them, you're feeling like they're meeting some need that your spouse is not meeting. And and I knew I was going down a slippery path. I will say that I have nothing to blame this on, because I was completely sober. I've told you parts of my story where I was drunk and I did really stupid things. I absolutely went into this exactly knowing what I was doing and planning it. And, like you talk about falling into doo-doo, stepping in doo-doo, or planning out the doo-doo. I planned the doo-doo. And Mike, during that time, I hadn't really done anything too far, but I probably, I hadn't done anything physical with the guy. But if you lust after someone in your heart, you've committed adultery, right? And I was doing deceptive things, seeing how much I could get away with. And during that time, Mike came and told me he needed to talk to me, and he told me he had been having an affair with someone. And I guess I had fears or just kind of like some thoughts about that. And I'd ask him and he said, no, nothing's wrong. I don't know why he would just tell me no. But he finally came to me and told me this. And he said they had ended it. And then I made the decision to go have sex with that guy. And it was one time. It was one time. I'm not saying that makes what he did worse or what I did worse, but I did it once and I was horribly shameful. I came home and I told Mike what I had done. We prayed together. I repented. It wasn't quite that easy after because the guy continued to pursue me and I had told him a lot of things to get this going that I didn't mean. So it created a whole complicated mess. Anyway, and
a
Mike
lot of
had
the collateral damage around this, right?
Yeah.
You've got two other people at play. No one's on the up and up. Everyone's got their own expectations and their own desires and their own needs.
Yeah.
And I mean, holy smokes, but please continue on.
No, when I think of it, it's so crazy that I thought this would actually help. And that's the crazy part about it.
That's the lie you told yourself. You're like,
yes,
oh, I'll do this and this,
yes,
and this will fix it.
Yeah, and I really believed it.
100%. No.
I believed it just like I did when I would talk myself into another drinking binge, and I would say, "This is going to be, you're going to control it this time. You're not going to black out because here's how you're going to do it." And kind of like you talk about being an intellectual Christian, I thought I could outsmart drinking, and I know a lot of people do that, where they think they can find a way to do it that will make it manageable, so they don't have to get rid of it completely. And that's what I thought with this thing with the guy. I thought, well, then we're going to be on equal playing field, and we can move on with our lives. We can move on, but it created so much damage. And then Mike kept revealing more things, and the more that he revealed, the more painful it was. And it was just, so it went into this year and a half time of being in the wilderness where it was like all of this had come out and we had ended things. My person was, he basically went away except for a little bit of trying to talk to me. But the person Mike had been involved with did not want to go away. And they actually started communicating with me and telling me things that I didn't know, revealing things that he had said, just really, just like gut-wrenching stuff. I thought I would never get over this. I thought there is no way I will ever get over this. And I say this because I'm sure a lot of people who have experienced betrayal like that feel that way. And that's also a lie of the enemy that tells you you're never going to get over it.
God can restore anything. And
Amen.
Everyone needs to know that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I thought, I can't do it. So for a year and a half, we tried to fix it in our own power. We moved from Duluth down here to the Twin Cities. That was an act of God, just within our jobs, that we got these doors open that we would never have done that. That's why I talk about us moving somewhere. God pushed us down here to get us away from where we were and to really, really, I believe, connect us to the ministries that healed us, because they were here and the people were here that we needed to connect with. So we moved here, but when we thought it would help us, it actually made things worse because we had not surrendered this to the Lord. We were trying to fix it in our own power. We were just going one step forward, two steps back, and every day bringing up stuff. The problem was there had not been forgiveness. There had not been true forgiveness. And it was just constantly bringing up, like, your sin is worse than mine, just couldn't move forward. So I want to just mention here that what God was dealing with me on this was making Mike an idol in my life. And I thought Mike would never, ever do anything to fail me. Everything I thought I believed had shattered, and I had put him in the role of Jesus. I had put him really as the Lord of my life. And God was dealing with me and saying, and for so long, I desperately wanted to just fix it at any cost. And he was saying, I need you to lay this on the altar. I need you to put your marriage on the altar. So we went through 2 separations. And I really started to feel that this is not going to work. And I had been talking to my pastor and different things. We had tried lots of different things that weren't working, secular things, 4 different therapists, many different books and stuff, and nothing was working. And I just came to the point where I was like, I just want to be done. I'm not going to be able to get past this, was something I kept saying. I can't get past this, because I thought about it all the time. I thought of the things she had said to me and the things that I knew. And just what I had done. I was like, we can't make this work. Like too much has happened. There's too much damage. And I always remember something she said to me, the other woman. She said, these are deep wounds that can't be mended. And I thought, wow, well, part of me thought, you don't know my God.
Yeah.
And we had been doing some painful email exchanges where I just, like sent her Galatians 6:7. I'm like, you're going to reap what you sow. And I mean, it was like totally not helpful what I was doing. But I decided I wanted to be done. I prayed. I said to God, I want to just be released from this. I want to be done. I want to move on. I asked Mike to give me a divorce. I wanted to be done. We had tried going to a marriage rebuilding class, and we left after 2 sessions because Mike shared some more stuff in there I didn't know. And then I was like, oh, that's it. I'm done. I'm done. That just takes the cake. I'm done with it. So I wanted to be done. And then I told my pastor, and he said, because Mike wanted one more chance. And my pastor said, maybe you can find it in your battered heart to give him one more chance. And I was like, yeah, well, if that happens, I guess the Holy Spirit's going to have to do it, because I just don't think I can do it. And Mike was living in a different place. We were digging ourselves a huge financial hole. That's another fallout of what we did. We had 2 households. He had this other townhome. We were so much in debt from that. And he's like, just let me move home until I can save enough money, and then I'll give you a divorce. And I was like, okay, all right, I'll let you do that. And he was going to stay in the downstairs area. But the day he was moving his stuff in, we found that the basement had flooded and he wasn't able to move his stuff down there. So I was like, all right, I guess you can come in the bedroom then. And we started talking, and he asked me if he could go to church with me and the girls. And so we ended up going to church, and then we found an intercessory prayer ministry that helped us. These were charismatic people. And if I could just talk about that for a moment, these people were Catholic. They were charismatic Catholics who they're like, oh, we don't care whatever your religion is. They were like better than any counselor we had seen, better than any therapist. And we found out about someone I worked with mentioned it to me as this little obscure ministry in Bloomington, so like 20 minutes from here. And Mike and I would go there, and these people would pray over us, and they guided us through very painful things, like saying the other people's names and praying for them, forgiving each other. The lady would pray in tongues and have visions of Jesus. She was probably 80. And I really had no reason to believe she was lying. And that was where we started to heal. That prayer ministry. I mean, we had gone to 4 or 5 therapists. We had done all these things, gone to marriage courses. None of it was helping. The thing that really helped us was them laying hands on us and praying and helping us forgive each other and being like, okay, you guys are back in the boat now. So one of you was in the water and one was in the boat. Now I see you in the boat. You're facing each other. And that has not changed for 10 years now, because after you've gone through a betrayal, I know, you think that you're never going to trust that person again. You think, how are we ever going to be the same? And they helped us heal. And then we moved on and we began restoring, and we got involved in that marriage ministry again. And we started, after a while, teaching other couples. So we spent 8 years doing a marriage course twice a year, sharing our story. I never thought that Mike would do that. He's very private. And just like when he came to your house, he doesn't want to talk about his stuff, but we started sharing what we went through and how Jesus healed us, because we wanted to point to something, something so something, a lot of people can get through minor things, but something like an affair can be super, super difficult. So we were able to heal and then just transform our marriage, because we're so much quicker to forgive. We address conflict. We learn many skills in that marriage course. We just had to be ready to go through it. The first time we were too raw and broken. We just couldn't take anything from it. But once that prayer ministry helped us heal, we were able to get into the marriage course and a Christ-centered course and learn these communication skills and things that we needed. And we're stronger than ever now. I mean, what God has done with us now, I'm just so grateful that we didn't give up and we didn't, throw in the towel and let the enemy win.
Well, I mean, it's quite a story, and it's quite a testimony on our Lord. And the thing that I think people need to take away from this is, when you're in the valley of the shadow of death, you don't think you'll ever be happy again. You don't think that you're like, it's always going to be some form of compromise. or it's always going to be some half dead thing, the relationship, whatever, yourself, whatever.
Yeah.
And the Lord will reincarnate it in a way, or resurrect it, actually is the best way, resurrect it into something far more beautiful than it was before, because it's been brought and submitted to him. Right.
Yes.
So again,
You're so right.
and so, everyone's like, oh, I'll never trust him, or
Yeah.
it's always going to be here and I'm just going to be doing time. And it's like,
Right.
no, no, no. When you bring it to him and you lay it on the altar and you get yourself out of the way, it becomes more beautiful than it was even before.
You're so right. That is absolutely true. That's a truth. I mean, I love Mike more now today than I did when I married him. I mean, we've gone through something so hard together, and just the transparency we have with each other now, the level of intimacy. You think you're never going to have a sex life. You think, how can I, this other person's in your bed, or these other people. And there is definite damage from that, but it's unbelievable how God can heal you and how he can bring beauty from this, thing the devil intended to destroy you. And I'm not blaming the devil. I mean, we did it ourselves. And then the fallout of it was enormous, but he's transformed our marriage, and he really has. And he's given us a testimony to share with others too. But I was just going to mention, as we come to the end here, that around 2015, I had mentioned I wrote stories my whole life. That was another thing I did with food and television, was reading books. Books were my friends that kept me company when I was alone. But I took out my old short stories and I started writing a book, kind of compiling all these journals. And I tried to make it happen outside of God's timing. I self-published in 2015. My pastor prayed over it. It went nowhere. I know, like we've talked about, Jason, a lot of people have great success with self-publishing if they are hustlers and they have connections and they can market it. I didn't have that, or do that, or have the time for that. So my book really fell flat, and I thought nothing was going to come of it. But then a couple of years ago, there was a column. Mike Lindell does a lot with Charisma Media, and they approached me about writing a column for them. And I started doing that, and then they found out I had this old book I had self-published, and they said, "Oh, well, we could publish your book too." And I was like, "What? How'd you know I had a book?" So they connected me with this publishing company called Beaufort Books, and they're publishing my memoir. It's called Blackout to Blessing, and it's going to be out this spring. So I'm excited about that. It's the story, not so much of the marriage testimony, but mostly the story I shared today, and really how Christ pursued me the whole way through it, really from a small child, and was pursuing me the whole way. And then I was approached by a second publisher in 2022 here in Minnesota called Broad Street. And they wanted me, they do devotional books. They do other books too, but mainly they specialize in devotionals. And I'm writing a devotional for addicts called Radical Freedom for them. So I'm very thrilled about that, to be 50 years old and finally getting these writing things I've dreamed of my whole life. And so a lot of my life has, become better than, it's better than it was in the beginning in a lot of ways.
I'm so glad, that you shared this powerful testimony. I know the Lord will use it. There's a lot in here.
Thanks.
And then, the first part of this, is powerful. I think the part that is so impressive is the level of detail you go into with your and Mike's, challenges, right? A lot of people would want to just brush over it. And the more you brush over something, the less power it has, right?
Yeah.
Well, you got to share the true pain details, the true levels of betrayal, the true whatever, to have any effect. If you just say, yeah, we both screwed up and it's done, where's the power in that?
Yeah.
Right. So you kind of have to, the Lord compels us to say the bad, and the bad is what connects. And people are like, ooh, that person just told me that dark secret about their life. And it's like, yeah, to fight for you.
Yeah, you're right. And it definitely took years to talk about it. It's shameful, especially sexual sin is some of the most shameful. And I would like, I don't know. Part of me wishes it never happened. I wish I hadn't sinned.
Of course, we had walked with the Lord every second of every day of our life, and and it was all. But that's not how it works for some of us, right? Just life is living sacrifice. I have one question for you.
Yeah.
You have family, you have kids. How are you navigating your past? You're about to be very public book, and wearing all your mistakes, on your forehead with your kids.
Yeah. Thanks for asking that. I'll answer that, and then I just have like 5 takeaways, I think, where I try to sum this all up. But I've tried to be very open with all of them. My oldest daughter read my book, actually in its self-published form, and I thought that that was enough, or I mean, I guess I thought my openness was enough. And there's been some wounding there that, some of it's my responsibility and some of it's hers. So I've definitely always tried to be open and look at some of the things my mom didn't do for me, and not to, diss her, but her inability to talk about sex, just being so
Mm,
uncomfortable with it.
sure.
So that's one of my big go-tos, is openness with sexual stuff. If they're asking me about it and they're curious about it and people are talking about it at school, I definitely want them to come to me instead of go to their friends. So complete openness. And just whenever I see a teaching moment, they probably get tired of it because I'm always talking about where I went wrong in my life, where I screwed up with not finding my value in Jesus, how that's always a recipe for disaster when you're looking for attention from men instead of love from your heavenly Father. I mean, and
Hmm.
that probably sounds empty to a teenager. I don't know. The best thing I could say is just openness and trying to lead them from the Bible and show them this isn't old, this isn't antiquated, this is the truth. This is the guide for your life. When culture is going to continue changing and fluctuating, you can stand on truth. And there are some things that you can that are rock solid, and there's not a lot. So it hasn't been going perfectly well. Like I mentioned, my middle daughter pushed her limits a little bit lately, and I believe Jesus opened our eyes to some things we needed to see before they got into a problem, into more of a problem. But she's just, interested in boys and interested in, validation from the world. And but she's a sweet, sweet girl and has a heart for Jesus, and she's quick to repent. She's always very respectful to Mike and me. She she's not rebellious. She doesn't push back on any punishment we enforce. But I think we've needed to be stricter in some areas and we weren't. And the Lord opened our eyes to some things. Praise God. I'm very grateful that he did.
So, what are your 5 takeaways that to summarize, this testimony experience?
Yeah, here we go. We'll get through these quick. Looking for love in all the wrong places is kind of the story of my life, from people who love imperfectly. And no one is ever going to love you like Jesus does. You're never going to find the perfect human being who's going to fulfill all your needs. So you should not expect that from your spouse or anyone. You have to put the Lord in number one. And actually, Mike said that last night and it warmed my heart. He's like, I love my wife. He just like walked into the living room. He's like, I love my wife. And he goes, but I love Jesus too. He said, but not in that order. I love Jesus first. I'm sorry, honey. And I'm like, no, that's exactly what I want you to say. I pray for that, actually, that Mike would have Jesus number one. Refinement and growth with the Lord has been a process. And the removal of the alcohol, pills, and cigarettes was instant, but then there was so much more that he wanted to do and is still doing with me. It's not done. I had to truly believe Christ is enough for me. And that was where I laid my marriage on the altar. And I really actually had a freeing feeling of whatever you want to do, God, I'm okay with it. I just want to be in your will. And if you want this marriage to work, you're going to have to help me and show me, not that I was giving him an ultimatum, but I was so tired of fighting and striving. I just had to trust him and surrender it to him. And that's when it turned around. I had to cease looking for approval in people, recognition, like from the news, the world, to completely die to that. I had to stop. Even now, I do it sometimes with trying to grow the Hope Report and getting excited with followers. And, I always have to keep that stuff in check because like we know there's a fine balance to that. We want to grow this for the kingdom. We want this platform to be huge to help people for Jesus, not for me, not for Jason. I think both of our hearts are straight up with that. We aren't trying to get recognition for ourselves, but I constantly look at my heart to see if it's in the right place. I don't need a sign or an experience from God. I need to trust him and obey him. I think he's tired of me asking him for a sign. He's like, pray to be in my will and trust and have faith.
Amen.
Yeah, I knew you'd like that one. And here's the last one. Choose faith over fear. Resist the devil and his attacks and don't give him a foothold.
Awesome.
The end.
Well, I know. So it's gonna. Do we have any idea of a date on when your book's gonna be coming out?
I think it's April 11th
Wow.
is the
All right.
release date.
Well, I can't
Um,
wait to be hyping that and,
Thank you.
to have a copy,
Yes.
signed autographed copy in my hand. And I can't wait
Yeah, you got it.
be talking about that at MRB with people and everything else. It's going to be exciting.
Thank you. Thanks, Jason. I know that I appreciate your support and just being,
Of course.
being there for me and my family. And like I said, when Mike and I were going through our dark time, part of our problem was we didn't have Christian couples who were modeling that lifestyle to us. We didn't seek that out. We didn't have a war council. So I've
Yeah.
learned that from you, the importance of that. And not just putting on like, oh, everything's great, we're doing really good, but just like
Mhm.
getting dirty with people, getting messy with them. Like,
Yeah.
here's where we're at. It's not always pretty. It's a lot of times it's ugly, but being
Yeah.
real with other
Yeah.
people.
Well, I think that's what it's all about. We're all supposed to be in relationship. And, a lot of people sterilize the Bible.
Yeah.
Those guys traveled with Jesus for 3 years, right? So
Mhm.
there's a lot that wasn't in there, and many people, that it's everything in between that, I wish I could know, like, Jesus, there's so much that we don't know that wasn't there, but you got to
Yeah.
understand that the reason why the disciples are so powerful is because they got to walk with Jesus everywhere. They lived with him, right? On the
Yeah.
road. They lived with him. They did everything with him. They worked with him. They went, they were all, this is gross. They did bathroom around each other.
Yeah.
They did everything around each other. Okay. So it's not this sterile show up for a sermon and walk away.
Exactly. They did life together.
Exactly. And that's what we're called to do. So I know I really appreciate you getting vulnerable. I know
Thank
this,
you.
it's always emotional when you share your story. Do you want to close this
Thanks.
out in prayer?
Yeah, do we wanna talk about our goodies before we go?
Oh,
Or
sure, sure.
yeah.
Sure, I wasn't sure if you
Yeah, no,
wanted
no,
to do
that's
that.
cool. Of course I
All
want
right.
to. We
So if
wanna
you
give
want to,
Mike Lindell some time every day.
sure. So if you want to support this program, you can support this program in a couple ways. One, you can donate to the Lindell Recovery Network, which is Mike's 501c3. It helps addicts, as you can see. You come
Did you
on
see
here. It's
Bill Wees?
Yep. This is a completely free program. It has the Operation Restored Warrior on here, which is something that everyone in America should go through. It is behind option C. You scroll down and it's right there. This is the program that helped turn my life around, that connected me to Jesus
Yes.
in a real way and saved me from being an intellectual Christian to a spirit-filled Christian. And Melissa has also gone through this. I also have countless friends who have gone through this. This is a no-brainer. Everyone in America should go through Operation Restored Warrior. It'll
Amen.
help you identify who you are, why you're who you are, who Jesus is, and it'll arrange the introduction, and then you can go from there. Anything else you want to say about the the Lindell Recovery Network?
No, I love it. It's amazing. We're working on our new staging site. You're probably getting tired of hearing that, but our technology guy is super busy and does a lot of different things for Mike. So we're working very hard on a new user experience with the new Operation Restored Warrior women's program on there. But for now, you can definitely go through the men's program. Like Jason said, it's a little more male oriented, but I went through, I went through the online one too, as well as the one in person, but you'll still get a lot out of it. And you can connect with some powerful testimonials of people who are just telling your story. I mean, there's, different types of drug addictions and behavioral addictions that you'll find something that resonates for you. And if you want biblical counseling help, maybe you don't want to seek out a therapist or a counselor. I mean, Christian counselors can be very good, but you can also read the counseling guides under section C just by searching for whatever problem you're experiencing. It'll match you up with some great books.
And you can all donate any amount you want there. You'll get Mike's free book right there, which is an amazing read. And the other way you can
Yeah.
support us is by using promo code HOPE on My Pillow. We have the same get the same discount that everyone else gets, when you use their promo code. So even if you're using some big shot's name, the Hope Report gets as big of a discount as they do. All right. And there are some specials on there. The new My Pillow 2.0 just came
Yeah, I got
out,
to check that out.
which I have not gotten it yet. I will be getting one soon. It is the same My Pillow with cooler technology that's now available to make it so the pillow doesn't get warm as maybe the older one does. I love the slippers. I absolutely love my coffee. It's organic. I prefer the light roast. Absolutely phenomenal. I also love the bed topper, which I use
Yeah,
when I'm
me too.
traveling, and then the dog beds. So those are everything I can actually 100% vouch for.
Yeah, amen. I need to get myself another pair of my slippers. I've been wearing my daughter's. I gave my other pair to my mom. So I need to make a run over to the store in Shakopee, and I want to get the new pillow too. And I don't know what else. I've got a whole list of stuff. They're having a closeout sale, I think, with a bunch of stuff deeply discounted. There's an outlet store in Shakopee too, where people can, if you're local, you can go get some really great deals at the warehouse in Shakopee.
So the other place where our promo code works as well is the My Store. A bunch of made in America entrepreneurs. They have their stuff on here. Mike puts them on here in one hub for them all to have. There's a ton of different things in here that are absolutely amazing. And Mike has just launched these got into the crate package or the box specials where you get some random items that someone chooses for you that go out there. That is something that a lot of different companies are doing. It's good to see Mike doing it. But there are some great items in here. If you click in here, this is just those ones. You get everything from my coffee to inventions to art to books to constitutions to, there's literally a ton of different products in here. You're going to find that that most of the things in here are going to be based around patriotism or God or both, as well as some, great cooking items and dog collars and all kinds of different things. There's a lot of stuff in here, and it all is made in America, and our promo code will work for it all.
Yeah, I need to have them pull up our promo code because I just know we're raking in a bunch of sales.
Yes, I can feel it right now. So here's how this works, right? The promo code, Melissa and I don't get anything, right? It just lets Mike know that that when they put in that hope, that's where they heard about My Pillow, that you guys are supporting him because you heard it from us, right?
Yep.
Or not because you heard it from us, but we were the ones
we were the messengers.
The messengers. So it really makes us look good to him. We really appreciate you. The other way you can support the show is by liking, sharing, and subscribing this on all platforms. Yes, we are on Facebook. Yes, we are on YouTube. We are in the Devil's Den because we are fishing from them. Please follow us and share our content there, even if you're barely there, just because every bit helps. Of course, we are tied to Mike Lindell, so we get all the shadow banning and the stuff that everyone else, that conservatives get. So we need your help. We are not doing this for money. We're not doing this for anything else. We are doing this to save souls. So help us save souls and help us lead people to get set free from addiction by sharing, liking, subscribing, even on platforms you disagree with.
Well said. And while you're at it, if you can subscribe and follow Lindell Recovery Network on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, we're on there too. So thank you, Sammy, for sharing and being on. Everyone that was commenting in the chat, I appreciate you listening and all the support.
All right. Do you want to pray us out?
Yeah, I'd love to. All right, let's pray. Father God, I come before you now in Jesus' name. Lord, I thank you for this day. I thank you for the opportunity to share what you have done in my life. Jesus, I'm so grateful and in awe of you and your care with my life, how you've protected me through so many dark things that could have taken my life. Jesus, I pray that my story would help others, that you would take all of me out of it, that you would get all the glory, that you would spread it with those who need to hear it, whether they've had an addiction or some kind of brokenness, or maybe a betrayal in their marriage. I pray the devil wouldn't win. And he isn't going to win. He's a defeated foe. But I pray that my story would give people hope that no matter what they've been through, the answer isn't in the world. The answer is in you, Jesus. Even if our circumstances don't work out the way we wanted, may we trust in your rock solid promise that we will live in eternity with you. There's so much more beyond this world and beyond our circumstances. I pray just that people would be inspired, that they would feel a sense of hope rising up as they just hear about what you have done in my life and where you have brought me. I pray you continue to give me strength to, fight against this dark world. Being in Minnesota, I pray you would give me new opportunities to share your love and share your light with those who are around me. And Lord, I pray this dangerous prayer in the presence of all the witnesses out there. I pray that you would send me wherever you want me to go. If it's here for now, I pray I'd be obedient, that you'd give me kingdom tasks to do while I'm here. But Lord, I want you to know I'm willing. I submit fully to you. I pour my life out. I just want to serve you however you want that to be. And Jason and I thank you for the opportunity to have this show. And we pray we could bless more people and lead them to you, and that you would just bless Mike Lindell. We thank him for the opportunity to do this. We pray this show, the channel, all the stories on the channel would reach other people and bring them to you. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. All right, everyone. God bless you. And we will see you Friday.
Is that tomorrow?
Yeah, it's tomorrow.
That's tomorrow. We have Sam Shamoon coming on tomorrow. He is a really powerful defender of the Trinity. He's got a big following on YouTube and Facebook. He's a friend of Muhammad Faridi, who we had on here. He's not a former Muslim, but he debates Muslims. He's very knowledgeable about the Bible and the Trinity. His whole purpose in life is to fight against Islam. So we're really excited to have him on tomorrow.
Awesome. Can't wait. God bless you all. See you tomorrow.
God bless.
Bye.
You're listening to The Hope Report. If you were blessed by this episode, please remember to like, comment, share, and subscribe to our channels.